Hello, and welcome to Law Deals, the podcast that dives deep into law firm transactions, succession planning, partnerships, and practice optimization. I'm your host, Ed Alexander. Today, I'm joined by Mark Powers, the founder and president of Atticus, a premier lawyer coaching firm that over the past 35 years has helped thousands of attorneys improve their lives and their practices through practice management, marketing, and growth strategies. Mark is an internationally sought-after speaker and the co-author of several influential books, including How Good Attorneys Become Great Rainmakers, which is now in its second edition. I think that was just recently released, and Time Management for Attorneys. So today we're tackling an intriguing concept, the Perpetual Law Firm. Is it fact or is it fiction? Can law firm owners really create a practice that continues to generate income even after they step away? Mark, welcome to Law Deals.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. I'm glad to be here for this conversation. You and I have we've had a couple of, in fencing, there's a term when you first
do battle a little bit?
I don't know what that's called, but there's a word for it. And you and I have had a couple of conversations. Although I will say that even as you and I have appeared in our initial discussions about this to be in different perspectives, and maybe that's not a bad term, but I don't think we're that far off when we talk about this. I don't. I think it's an important conversation, and I think every law firm owner, especially in the solo small firm world, and I would think when you're thinking about getting to a place, what am I going to do with this firm? Not too late. Too many attorneys wait till there's no runway to land the ship, land the plane. So you got to have this, I would think if you're an owner and you've got to be preemptively thinking about these things.
So let me give a little bit of background on that. So at first, I think the first instance that this came up was I was listening to Tom Tona's Lead Counsel podcast, which if anybody in the audience is not already subscribed to that, they certainly should be. And you were talking about, I think the thing that threw me off was when I heard you say, what if you didn't do succession planning? What if we planned for this perpetual law firm model? And then I came to the Atticus Summit, and absolutely fantastic program, by the way. And I would recommend anybody who's here go to that program. But at that, you had Victor Medina on stage talking about the Perpetual Law Firm. So let's start off let's define what is the Perpetual Law Firm.
So you're right. That's a term that Victor uses, and I don't mind it. It's more of a, it's a good way to think about it from a marketing perspective. But I have often called it more of, we think of law firms sometimes in different types of models that you can build it, design it in. And I think of it as what I call the CEO model. And so for me, there's a lot of background on this. And I'm going to stop for a second to make sure you are okay where I'm going to go. I'm either going to step back and give some background on why I think a CEO or perpetual model is an interesting option. There's certainly attorneys have many options, but I think this is an interesting option for them. Or I can just describe what the CEO model or perpetual model is. Where would you prefer me to go?
What the CEO model is, and then why it makes the most sense, or it makes sense for some attorneys. Let's do that.
Yeah. So with the CEO model is saying that, listen, your law firm, I'm backing up just a hair, your law firm is an asset. It's an asset like almost every other asset you have in your financial portfolio, whether you have annuities or an IRA or rental properties or stock portfolios, whatever it is you've got, and they're designed to provide you passive income over time.
That we absolutely agree on 100%.
So in my world, when the law firm is operating brilliantly, operating properly, it should be throwing the shareholders dividends. And, in my world, and well-run law firm is often going to get dividends separate from salaries. When I say dividend, profits to the shareholders, when run well, and we're not in a growth model and reinvesting that profit, 25 to 35%. 35 is really on the high end, but we've got plenty of firms there.
Let me stop for 1 second there. and just kind of talk that through, because I think that's a really important point, right? So what we're doing is we're separating out the salary of the owner for the labor that the owner provides to the law firm, because labor has a market value. So you go out and you could go work for somebody else and provide the same services and get paid for that labor that you provide. And then the profit is over and above what your fair market value salary is. So you are then receiving dividends or distributions, depending on the structure of your firm, which represents the profit that you get for being an owner, for taking the risk of ownership of that firm.
Yes. And that's whether in a partnership or individual owner of the firm, you have a percentage of that equity. And that, when I think about that salary, attorneys struggle with this. And there's two answers. There's a couple of answers around that salary. One is, I like to play the shareholder for whatever it would take to replace them in the marketplace for the work they're doing, usually the substantive work they're doing, the legal substantive work. If I had to get another attorney, whether a litigator or a transactional attorney, to replace me at my level, what would it cost? And that's what I would put into that salary. Now, their CPA is going to have a whole different conversation and say, no, you should take this salary or that salary and lower the dividend or higher the dividend. But that's a tax planning conversation as opposed to the sheer operating of the business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what we do when we take a law firm where they want to, or what's the price that we should offer the law firm at, or what's the deal we should do, right? We're taking out all of those tax-related components and trying to figure out, from just a pure financial perspective, what does this law firm throw off?
Yes. So you and I are agreed that, number one, we want our assets to produce passive income. And the law firm, from my perspective, is probably the best financial asset that anybody owns as far as business. It's the best. It can buy them personal freedom, buys them significance, meaning, purpose, and financial wealth if they run the operation well. And so there's the big if.
Yeah, that is.
And this comes to the CEO model. When the firm is run well, it's usually, in most smaller firms, it's the founding attorney or the founding attorneys that end up doing the management, COO, and even COO. Like, they might hire a firm administrator, but firm administrators really under the thumb of the attorney a great deal. A lot of them can't push back beyond that. They just are never given the authority to carry out the functions that need to happen on an operation. Like, they can't easily go and fire somebody without going to the shareholders. And then the shareholders say, that's my favorite secretary. You can't fire that person. Or that attorney's been here with us. They don't have the authority to do it. They probably are often capable. Right. They just don't have the authority, right? And so, right. So this is
the piece. Yeah, this is the piece when we're talking about the entrepreneurial operating system, changes that a bit, because from that perspective, you are getting second in command, COO, integrator that has that role. But you're right, for smaller law firms, they're not going to get into that EOS system quite yet.
And so we're usually talking about the founder. Mm-hmm. And founding attorneys they're the managing partners for a second, and they're operating it. Now, the ones that actually rise to profitability and to success are people that often have those abilities. They really can. They have a certain capability to let go when, again, this is critical. They have to be able to let go of some or most of the substantive work to be able to manage the firm well. Vast majority of attorneys won't do that. They will not kill the hero on the substantive side. They just can't let go. And it interferes with the operation and the development of the firm. But those that can, and those that have some innate ability or past experience at running an organization, can do it very well. They're rare and far apart. But let's say you get it operating well. You've got the staffing systems working. You got the marketing systems working. You're not an expert. Do you know what I mean when I say that?
Yeah, deep technician.
Well, not only deep technique, but I'm a boutique law firm. And that what I've sold to the market is that I am the most capable, brilliant attorney at this. And you should work with me.
Right.
Because the value, again, you know this probably more than most, is that the more brilliant you think you are and are perceived in the marketplace, the more dependent the firm is on you for all of these things, the less value the firm has, and the less profit it will probably have.
So I think, to put in terms of some of the things that we've talked about on this podcast before, this is the 3 law firm type model, right? So we have the process firms, we have the relationship firms, and we have the brain surgery firms. And what you're really talking about is the brain surgery firm. And those are almost impossible to sell.
Yes.
Whereas the process firm, which is humming along based on systems and procedures and not necessarily focused at all on the owner, those are the easiest to sell. Right.
People are attracted to the firm and what the firm can do with them and the talent. And they could even be brought in by the name as long as the founder does it. Like, it's okay to talk about a name of a firm as long as I say a positive. It's someone like Ed Kanan.
Right. Right.
You would perceive any other person. He's a matrimonial attorney that deals with high-end matrimonial cases, some of the highest you're going to encounter. And that would be the epitome of a boutique expert brain surgeon model that you're talking about. But Ed doesn't do that. Ed's name is still there, but he attracts him in and he has a model for taking care of the client that's dependent on other bright, intelligent attorneys and team that takes care of the client. So that's key. And that has value.
Oh, yeah. The beauty of the team approach is that, whereas in the brain surgery model, it's just tied to one person. In the team approach, it's tied to a whole plethora of people in the firm. And so as a result, if one attorney leaves or if one paralegal leaves or something like that, the firm is not impacted because from a client's perspective, I'm dealing with the firm. I'm not dealing with John Smith attorney.
Yes. So that argues that all of us that own a business should be working on the business to ensure that it's not dependent on the founders and that the teams are incredibly capable, talent, drama-free, and process systems driven. All of us should be working on that. So let's assume that we're there. And this is where you and I don't know if we're going to differ yet. So far, we're in agreement on everything, right?
There you go.
But here's my problem. So I'm at to that point and say that I'm in my 60s and I'm thinking about, okay, what do I do with this firm? I've got a couple of really good associates here and I could make them partners with a little bit of equity. Recently learned from you instead of non-equity, but a little bit of equity. And I could get them on a path to basically buy me out over time. So that's one option, which is what I would call the successor model.
We call it internal sale.
Internal sale. But for them, they're taking people that they're developing. Now, the problem with that, and you know this, right? I'm going to make up a stat, which I think is really close to it, but it's an opinion, not a subjective based one, because it's not an objective one. It's more subjective from experience. But I would say the vast majority of attorneys that were capable would want this model. 70 to 80% of them would say, I want that. I want these people I've groomed. I want them to be able to come up, create a legacy with this firm and keep it going. And by the way, buy me out. My experience is probably about 10 to 15% of those 70 or 8 are able to do it. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which you encounter, right? The one is the lack of runway. If I wait till I'm 70 and do that, we got some real problems because, but if I don't get those people ready early, those associates ready early, and most important, agreeing to buy in and starting to buy in early. because these deals fall apart when you've seen them, but I've seen them over and over again, where they've identified these associates. These are the ones, they're going to do it. And so we have a conversation. They say, yes, I'd love to do it. And then 4 or 5 years later, it comes time to draw up the agreements and put the money on the thing. And he goes, what? Money? How much money? No.
Well, there's the key there, right? That agreement has to be done much earlier.
Yes, but it's
right?
not usually, right? It's not.
Right. No, it's not. It's not. It has to be done much earlier. And there has to be an understanding, right, that you can't take someone who is a technician today and turn them into a business owner tomorrow.
Right.
That takes years to do.
Yes. So there's development work to do, and you're doing that, right? You're doing the development work. You're maybe even getting them a coach. You're working with them all the way up to, okay, now we got to put some money down. And it's like,
right.
What? That much? I don't think so. So what I love about this is I tell shareholders, don't sell.
That's where we have the disagreement.
Well, wait a second. Hear me out. This is too valuable. Don't sell. And I tell the associates, do whatever you can to buy in because it's going to make you wealthy.
Right.
And you're buying something that has already been branded. It's already got processes. Don't be dumb about this. And trying to get those two. So neither one listened to me, but that's what I argue for. So my argument around these internal purchases or successions for Atticus members, and I would say historically, I would argue for succession and this process. But what I've noticed over and over is how many times it collapses. Often, when you take a founder that's done a really great job of building a firm, to your point, a lot of the associates and junior partners don't have the same skill level, and often you need 2 or 3 that could even replace that original founder for either marketing or management or grinding. So that's part A of this. It falls apart very fast. It falls apart often, and the vast majority of attorneys wait too long to do the critical things like get an agreement in place, get the money in place, and they don't have a big runway any longer. They may have started when they're 60, now they're 68, and their runway is really short. So those are my problems.
Yeah, I mean, what you've described is putting your eggs in one basket right there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you haven't even gotten the basket around the egg, right? Because at the end of the day, you've got to have buy-in as early as you possibly can.
And buy-in is the key word, not like, yes, it's
signing the document. That's buy-in.
There's so many investments that have gone wrong because they've done focus groups. If we build this condominium in this place, would you buy a condo? I'd buy one. They build it, and people go, I can't afford that. I don't. It's like it's the same thing here. You got to get a contract. You don't build it. Get a contract, and people saying, I will buy that. I am buying. Here's some money to demonstrate it. Here's a down payment.
That's the lean startup formula, right? They talk about your friends and your family and everybody around you is going to try and be nice and say yes to you, but make them write a check and that'll get them to say no.
It changes everything. I heard this great line about checkbooks. It says, if you want to know what someone's really committed to in life, look at their checkbook.
Yeah.
You can say, well, I'm committed to ending hunger and I'm committed to world peace and I'm committed to this and this. But really what you end up committed to is going out to dinner. And I just look at the checkbook, right? So let's come back. So here we are. I've got the business. I've got associates and those sorts of things. So here's my other problem. There are people out in the universe that have been trained brilliantly to run an organization. How to hire, fire, how to manage the systems, how to keep the bookkeeping working, how to make sure production systems are moving. Not that they're experts on the substantive work itself, but they know how to operate the business so that it does well. And they're good at it. And they've been doing it longer than you've been running a business. And they do it for businesses much larger than you. And this universe of people are called CEOs. They know what they're doing. Now, I could get a COO, which is really just managing operations, which is great.
Right.
Different than me. To me, it's different than a firm administrator. A lot of people like to think their firm administrator is the COO, operating person. Not usually. If they've been under your tutelage, they're under your thumb. I'm sorry to say they're under your thumb, and they just do your bidding. A true operations person will push back and has the authority and the ability to push back and say, no, this person needs to be fired. No, you need to follow this process in the system too. Even though you're the owner, everybody's got to follow this policy and this process. Most firm administrators in the smaller, when you get larger, it's a different world, but in the solo small firm world, they don't have a lot of authority. I love them. Please hear anyone listening to this. I'm not dissing firm administrators. I think they're capable. They're just not given the authority.
The opportunity to be
they're
CEO.
given responsibility, but they're not given authority, and they're beaten down over time. So I need a true operations person. Now, the law firm, at its heart, whether some people may not like this on this podcast, but it's a business.
It is a business.
Businesses are businesses are businesses. And I have COOs that know how to run businesses. Why would I take an attorney that has no skills, that's a substantively brilliant attorney, that's my associate, possible successor? Why would I take them and make them in charge of this organization, take them out of production, take down billing, and put them into this position? I don't have a problem with taking some of the biggest growth I've seen in firms is taking my best attorney and put them in charge, responsible for other attorneys' production, not for the management of the organization, which is what a lot of firms do.
So I think what you're talking about is skill set, right? And would you hire that person who is a 5 or 10-year attorney and say, oh, I'm going to hire you to be CEO of my firm outside, right? Of course not. Nobody would do that.
No.
They're hiring them to be an attorney because that's their skill set, right? So just you have to align the job criteria with the skill set.
But they don't do that. They say we have an successor. The successor says, well, I want to be like you. I need to be like you. And by the way, often the successors don't want to be that. They don't want to run the firm. They don't want to be in charge of marketing. Matter of fact, they don't want to do any marketing. Why wouldn't I? And this comes back to the CEO model. Why wouldn't I keep my great attorneys, because I've hired and developed good attorneys. Why wouldn't I keep them doing what they love to do and they're good at, which is working the matters, and hire COOs and CEOs to come in and run the firm and maintain a profit, which can be given to me passively for the rest of my life. Now, let me just stay with one more point on that. Why wouldn't I do that is the question that you can answer. Why wouldn't I do that they would do that? Oh, and by the way, it still gives me as the founder, the owner, the shareholder because I've already killed my heroic behavior in the firm. It gives me opportunity to still participate in the firm, either strategically, mentoring, developing talent, marketing. I can still do all of those things. And matter of fact, I could even take on matters if I want to, but it's by choice. This perpetual firm, as Victor would say, is driving passive income to me like every other asset, but it's also given me a place of significance, of importance for a good part of my life, well into my 80s if I want.
So I think the area that I would say I would disagree. I love all of that and think every law firm owner should do that. Now, there's different levels of that, right? Because if I'm a solo and I want to stay solo, I can still set up a structure that supports me that does that, but it's going to look completely different than if I have 5 or 10 associates, right?
Yeah.
The first question is, what do you want and why do you want it? The first two questions, I guess, right? But I think the issue becomes, hey, so we set this up. That's great. I don't think it's a law firm that can be put on autopilot. I haven't seen
It's not autopilot. There's still people running it. There's no autopilot. By the way, there's always going to be problems in the law firm. There's always going to be
That's right.
something.
That's
But
right.
that's why I have a really good CEO. You know who I'm going to hire is not a CEO that's been running a firm my size. I'm going to hire a CEO that's been running some organization twice my size. So every problem looks small to them.
That's good. But I would say that there is not a business in the world that has passive income. There has to be a focus on it. And the bottom line is that nobody is going to care as much about your business as you do. Right. And so I think that at the end of the day, that works to a point, and it's a great life to a point. Where the wheels come off the cart is when you are no longer involved in that firm pretty much in any way possible. Right. At that point, you've got to have some succession arrangement in play. So let's just take 80, right? Does the owner want to still come in at 80 years old? I wouldn't want to come in at 80 years old. I can tell you that.
I might,
okay.
But it's by choice.
It is by choice. By choice.
There's so much that once you're by choice and you're doing the things you love to do in the firm, as long as not a nudnik that's in everybody's business and destroying the authority of your key players, but it's a great place. It's like you get to contribute for the rest of your life. Not sure. That you have to. You can go and do something else, but you get to contribute.
Well, I think that's the problem. I don't think you can go someplace else and that firm maintain the footing that it's on. I get it that there's a COO or CEO or both in place running the firm, managing things. But even if you look at public companies, right, they ultimately bring in their C-level executives into equity. And unfortunately, we can't do that in law firms, in most law firms.
But I can bring in my partners. I can give them some equity, not give, let's correct that, right? I can sell equity to partners, which I want to do. I want them to have a stake. I want those associates now to have a stake as a partner, but they don't have to run the firm. But they can have a stake. They see that it's important, and over time, their stake can grow higher and higher. But
So that part is essential to me because that is your succession plan, right? So that the hurdle that you have
succession. I don't know. I struggle with the word succession, but go ahead. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the end of the day, it's going to be over sometime for you. We don't live forever, right?
Right.
Okay. So we've got to plan for that because we don't know when it's going to occur. And at some point you have an asset, right? So the example I always give when lawyers are thinking about dying at their desk or liquidating is like, oh, your kids went to college, so you burned down your house. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? And so you don't want that to happen in this type of firm. If you've created this wonderful firm, you want to have a way out, or at least have your spouse or children or heirs or whoever, charity that you're leaving everything to, have the benefit of what you've created. So you've got to have that piece, that succession piece in there. And
okay, maybe. So I want to make another point that I think is fascinating to think about. So when you look at law firms, and this is a pretty good, well-operated law firm, let's assume, often the sale value is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is somewhere between 0.05 and 3% of revenues.
So we would do, depends on the size of the firm, we would do somewhere around 2 to 2.3 times owner benefit, or if it's a larger firm, 3 to 4 times EBITDA. And then that
3 to 4 times what?
EBITDA, so earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
Don't get technical on me.
And then look at the gross revenue.
Attorney, broker, don't get technical on me. Go ahead.
So anyway, that's how we would look at it. Is those kinds of measures.
All right. So if let's say I'm going to sell for whatever that technical term you use gets up to $1 million that I could sell it for, right?
Okay.
And I'm going to take a note for that $1 million.
Yep.
from, oh, no, I'm going to get it. They're going to get it. They're going to get a loan and they're going to get me the $1 million. Let's say that's how it goes.
Right.
If I was getting $1 million, I know this is a really terrible question, but what would the firm basically have to be producing in net income on a regular basis for me to get $1 million?
Let's just use 2.0 to make it nice and easy, right?
Right.
So if you're the 100% owner and the law firm is making about $500,000 a year, so that would be roughly $1 million value then for that law firm. 2x.
2x.
So yeah, so
500,000 net of 500.
Yeah, that's correct.
That net, that 500, if the firm's well operated, let's say well operated, it's going to be about a 20% profitability. So 500,000 is 20% of whatever the gross revenues are. Yes.
Yeah. So roughly 2.5 million. But the numbers aren't going to work perfectly. But let's just use it for example.
Yeah, I agree. And so, but I'm selling it for 1 million, 2 times that 500,000. Now, anywhere I invest that $1 million, you know where I'm going on this. Yeah. I'm going to be pretty good if I can get 7%. Yes.
That's right. Yeah. So you're going to get 70,000 out of it. Yep.
What we say, 70,000 a year.
Correct. Yep.
Now, off of the firm, I'm getting a 20% return, and I'm getting. Tell me where I'm wrong. 500,000 a year.
Well, I think you have to take into account a couple of things on that. So the first is that you are going to have partners in the firm, right? Because when you retire, you're going to bring people out. So let's just say you bring on 20% partners out of that firm, right?
Let's say 25%.
25% or 125?
Two. I'm left with 50. Actually, I'm going to be left with 51%. But let's say I'm left with 50%. So now I'm taking out 250,000 personally.
Right. Now, so 100%, you're correct, right? But what have you bought?
But before we do that, I want to make it clear before you shoot me down on this for the listeners. I'm selling for $1 million. On that $1 million, I've got that wonderful $1 million asset, but I'm getting 70,000 a year on that, 7%. On keeping the firm, putting in a CEO. By the way, I want to make another point about this CEO. This wonderful CEO I'm talking about. Whatever you think you're going to pay for that CEO, double it.
Yeah.
Good ones, the ones you want to protect your asset and do it brilliantly, will be far more than you think. Right. You're going to pay for them. But they're protecting a return of 250,000 a year.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. One is obviously so we've talked about the partners. You're going to bring the partner on. The net income is going to go down because you're paying that CEO, right? I mean, that's just what's going to happen ultimately.
You're right. All right. Now I'm going to be down to, and there's 2, but all right. I was going to budget them in there, but if they're doing well, the firm's growing a little bit, but I'll go down to 200,000 then.
Okay. Right. So now I'm pulling 200,000 out, but what we're not accounting for is the risk profile, right? So if you buy a thinly traded stock, it may have a huge return on investment, but the risk is that you're going to be stuck with that stock, right?
Right.
Whereas you buy a blue chip, there's pretty much always going to be a market unless the financial world melts down, right? So that's what the difference is that you're paying for. You're increasing your risk for a higher return. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You might have a portfolio that supports that, right? So you've got a bunch of really solid investments and this is just some piece on the side, and that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, you've got to plan for that asset, because now what you've done is, instead of having that $1 million sitting around waiting for your heirs, because you're living off the 70, right? And so you're going to leave the $1 million for your heirs. Instead of that, now at the time that the firm sells, you've got to have a way to cash out so that they get whatever the value is of the firm going forward. Now, hopefully it's grown.
Yeah.
That'd be great. But we don't know that. So there is a little bit of a difference between it. We can't just look at the raw numbers.
Yeah, you're right. It is. I'm going to say, this was going through my mind when you were talking, is when Sean and I were young, and my wife, Sean, those of you who don't know, Sean McNallis is my wife, and she's a partner at Atticus and a shareholder at Atticus, and also the more than co-author of those books you talked about. We're talking about buying rental properties. Mm-hmm. And she said, here's the thing I like about rental properties. I could paint it or add a fence, and I'm going to improve the value of that. But I have control over that. If I put it into the stock market, I have no control really over that. Those businesses can do anything they want. And she's right? It was a very sound thought. And we bought rental properties.
It's a very conservative approach, yes.
It was a conservative, right. It was a much more conservative approach, and I understand. But we also grew a business at the same time.
That's right.
And I can say the business has provided far more returns than those real estates would ever do, that real estate ever do. But she had the idea of control, right, is that I can still impact the risk. I can still impact the development. And so it depends, right? It depends on a lot of things, where you are in life and what you're thinking about, how much work you've done. So this is, for me, why I would encourage everyone listening to this, and I'm assuming it's mostly attorneys listening to this, that they be working on the business.
100%.
Start killing that heroic ability. You're driving the value down of this firm every time you take on a new matter that you're handling yourself. Now, I'm not saying you have to give it up totally, but you've got to reduce that dependency, and you need the firm working.
Yeah. So Mark, everything that you've said, I totally agree with, except for any part about not having that succession plan in place, so that should you die, should you become unable to manage that risk by participating in the management of the law firm, that you have a way out.
So you and I agree on that, because it's an update. I agree with you on that, because that's an updated conversation on succession. The historical conversation about succession is what we talked about. I've got to groom these associates to take over. Now, that model can still work. I'm not saying you throw that out, because it can work. There's some firms that do it brilliantly. They know how to do it. We have a firm that every 10 years, there's 3 partners. Every 10 years, they take one of the associates 10 years out and say, they've worked with them for a number of years. You are the next partner. And now they start taking money out of them for those 10 years. And when those 10 years are up, one attorney is leaving the firm, retiring, and the other is coming in and buying in. And by the way, it's a little bit of a Ponzi, because that buy-in is paying out the attorney that's retiring, right. But it still works, right? It keeps the firm going with solid people. The firm operates. They're a really well-operated firm. So that's a more of a large firm model. And I think the important thing to remember there is that it really requires some kind of level of number of attorneys to be able to handle that model, because you've got to have a constant inflow and a constant outflow. And the inflow has to be larger than what you expect your partnership to be, because some of those people are going to fall out along the way. In this case, they don't have any fault, because they pick them well. They take out money the whole time, unless something catastrophic. So, but that goes to the point, the danger. I think this is a risky model.
Yes.
Trying to get the associates to fit them into, associate later becoming a partner, to fit them into what I need them to be when I've hired them for their substantive talent. And now I have to get them to fit into this thing and be a risk taker and put the money up. So I'm less, over time, I've become less enamored with the historical succession model, not the one you're talking about, but the historical one. I'm less, it can work. It has worked, but it's a rare thing when it works well.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to remember about what I call internal sale and you call succession. And that is, the person that you're hiring to go out and bill the maximum number of hours is probably not the person that's your successor, because they are a technician. They don't understand business. And I don't say that in a negative way. It's just who they are. Right.
It's not what they signed up. They signed up for, often they signed up for, let me do my work brilliantly.
Right.
And make sure I'm making money, but don't screw with me. By the way, the only other thing I'd say, I want to add something. I apologize. I want to add something to the COO model, a CEO model, or perpetual law firm. My job as owner is to make those other partners, those junior partners, if you will, low equity in, make them wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Either in salary, income, shares, make them wealthy.
Yeah. So the golden handcuffs is what you're talking about, right? And you've got to have that in place.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that in place, you're going to have more people coming and going because they'll go down the road for, $20,000 more in salary or something like that, right?
Exactly.
That's the problem. So you got to make it, the environment has to be great and the money has to be great for that to work.
And good work. I talk to attorneys and they're like, I don't understand this next generation. And they're still here. I talked to someone yesterday. These Gen Zs, I'm trying to get them. They won't even work 55 hours over a week. I don't know what's wrong with them. You know what's wrong with them? They looked at you and see that you've given your whole life to this thing and you're not particularly happy. You let your health go. You don't particularly have a lot of options, and you're trying to get me to do that too.
Interesting way to run businesses sometimes, right? Interesting way. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you coming on. I do want to just say a couple of things that, ultimately you and I have known each other for 30 years this year. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly seeing your advertisement in the Orange County Bar News, which
By
was
the way, which Steve Riley saw it in the Tampa one.
And that was a long, long time ago. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate everything that you and Sean have done for me, honestly, because, all of these concepts, I learned them early on just because you and I happened to cross each other at some point in time. So really has worked out. And I would say for anybody who's dealing with any issues in their practice, if you don't absolutely love going to work every day, then it's worthwhile to reach out to Atticus. Certainly listen to the podcast, Great Practice, Great Life. It's a wonderful podcast. Steve does a great job with it. I would recommend attending the summit. I know it's just passed, so it's November of 25, but what a great lineup you had this year, and I'm sure you will in 2025 as well.
Thank you. And thank you for, we refer a lot of, we want our clients to go to you when they're thinking about these things, right? And finding the right people to broker with, the right people to contract with. You're our main guy. And
thank you very much.
We tell people, you got to go talk to Ed because he's the one that he knows this. And I've valued our relationship. And I also appreciate you giving me an opportunity to articulate this CEO and this perpetual model, because I think it's an important evolving conversation that attorneys need to hear.
Absolutely need to hear it. That is for sure. Well, thanks, Mark, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay. Bye, Ed.
Bye.